evolutionary origin of life and its development is false. So we're looking at the worldwide flood and how it explains or interprets the fossil record. And the fossil record are the abundance of dead creatures that have been preserved in different layers of rocks all over the world. And we are going to be showing in this review that the worldwide flood that took place in the days of Noah is really the explanation of the fossils that are all over the world in different layers of rock called sedimentary rock. And they offer the accurate explanation, and it is not the evolutionary interpretation of the fossil record that is true. It is a false interpretation. Before I change the screen, just let me back up a little bit and explain what the evolutionary interpretation is. Evolutionists see the fossil record in different layers of rock as a history of life, from the first life all the way to the most developed form of life, which is human life. So they believe that if you look at the layers of rock, you can see organisms changing over time to become what they are today in human life. However,
excuse me. I don't know if you're changing the screen, but it's not changing.
No, I haven't changed it yet.
Okay.
But the worldwide flood shows us that all these fossils, all these creatures belong to the same period of time, not to different periods of time. They belong to the time of Noah. And it's not like one creature evolved into another. They were all fully formed and in different kinds. And it is not that it is a history of the origin of life and the development of life to the present time. That basically is what lesson 11 is about. Now, I want you to pay attention to the highlighted sections. Those highlighted sections are the places in our revision that you need to focus much of your time on. Okay, that will prepare you for your final exam. So first of all, in lesson 11, we look at the evidences that the living things which are now fossils were all living at the same time. Number one, a rock layer named for a specific period of time contains fossils from different time periods. Fossils are being found, quote, in the wrong place, end of quote, all the time. But it's not that they are really in the wrong place. They're only in the wrong place from the evolutionist point of view. They think that each layer of rock represents different periods of time. But that is not so. They all belong to the same period of time. So we can't really say that they are found in the wrong place. They're all together. It is not that one evolved into the other and the other evolved into something else. They're not found in the wrong place, but according to the evolutionary interpretation, certain fossils should not be where they are. But that in itself shows us that something is wrong with the evolutionary interpretation. Notice especially, Brother Golding, what I have underlined. A rock layer named for a specific period of time contains fossils from different time periods. They're not really from different time periods, but that is what the evolutionists think. So if they're not from different time periods, they must be from the same period. But the evolutionists think that they are from different time periods. So that is one evidence that the living things which are now fossils were all living at the same time. They were not living at different times. Number two, there are vast fossil graveyards found throughout the world, consisting of animals and plants, which evolutionists have placed in different periods of time, represented by the different rock layers. But these animals and plants from so-called different periods of time are found mixed up together. So if they're mixed up together, how could they be from different periods of time? And here are some specific examples of vast fossil graveyards. In Agate Springs, Nebraska, USA, there is a fossil graveyard of about 9,000 animals and plants, rhinos, horses, camels, giant wild boars, birds, plants, trees, seashells, and fish. Now, if the evolutionists say that we evolved from fish, then what are fishes doing in the same place with these other creatures? So if they're all together, it means that they were all living at the same time. And none of these different kinds of animals were the ancestors of these other living creatures. They were all together at the same time. They had to be together at the same time for them to be buried in the same place. Here are some more examples of fossil graveyards. In the Alaska, which is on the northwestern section of the United States, and Siberia, which is on the northeastern section of Russia, there were found a graveyard of bears, wolf, fox, badgers, saber-tooth, cat, jaguar, lynx, mammoth, mastodon, horses, camel, antelope, bison, caribou, moose, elk, sheep, musk, ox, yak, ground sloth, and several rodents. Again, if there were evolution taking place, how is it that all of these creatures were buried together and that one of them did not evolve into the other? In France, hundreds of thousands of marine creatures are buried with amphibians, spiders, scorpions, millipedes, insects, and reptiles in a fossil graveyard. In Wyoming, a state in the United States, alligators, fish, birds, turtles, mammals, many varieties of insects, and palm leaves are buried in the Green River. So the question remains, if these animals belong to different periods of time and one had evolved into another, how is it that they were found buried together? Let us now look at evidences that these living things, which are now fossils, were buried and fossilized fast. Number one, all around the world in rock layer after rock layer, there are billions of dead things that have been buried in water-carried mud and sand. Their state of preservation frequently shows that there had to be rapid burial and fossilization, just like one would expect in the flood of Noah's time. There is abundant evidence that many of the rock layers were laid down quickly, one after the other, without significant time breaks between them. Preservation of animal tracks, ripple marks, and even raindrop marks testifies to rapid covering of these features to enable their preservation. Many of the same fossils' remains are not in one layer of rock alone, but their preserved remains are in many different layers of rock, which again shows that the different layers of rock are not different periods of time, but the same period of time in which these living things, trees and animals lived. Let us look now at evidences that these living things, which are now fossils, were buried and fossilized first. We continue to look at the evidence. Number 3, the scarcity of erosion, soil formation, animal burrows, and roots between layers of rock also show they must have been deposited or laid down in quick succession, one after the other. Number 4, the radical deformation of thick layers of sediment, such as what we have in the photograph below, without evidence of cracking or melting, also shows how all the layers must have been still soft when they were bent, meaning that these layers were not laid down millions of years apart. They were all together. They were all laid down at the same time. They were all soft so that they were capable of being bent before hardening into rock. Okay, so those highlighted areas are the areas you need to focus on in lesson 11. I'll be sending this later on today. So we're moving on now into lesson 12. Okay, this is it. Okay, lesson 12, do similar body parts and similar DNA mean one common ancestor or one and the same designer? Okay, again, notice the highlighted sections of the lesson. Spend much of your time on these sections. Do similar body parts and similar DNA mean that all living things descended from one and the same ancestor? One of the often used arguments by evolutionists to try to prove that all living things evolved from one and the same ancestor is the similarity of body parts and of DNA. For example, an ape has 2 eyes, 2 ears, 1 nose, 1 mouth, teeth, 1 tongue, 2 hands, 2 feet, and a human being has 2 eyes, 2 ears, 1 nose, 1 mouth, teeth, 1 tongue, 2 hands, and 2 feet. They go further than this by claiming that an ape's DNA, that is the software in the cell that determines the characteristics of a living thing or a living person, and a human being's DNA have 98% similarity, and claim that this proves that apes and humans are cousins and that we share one and the same ancestor. Okay, so the question is chimp DNA really 98% similar to human DNA? The idea that human beings and chimps have close to 100% similarity in their DNA is often asserted. Early studies based on a small fraction of the genetic code led to claims of 98% similarity. With the chimp DNA now completely decoded, the similarity, when all the DNA is included, is not more than 87% and arguably below 70%. The differences are even greater, for the DNA in humans has an amount of information equal to 1,500-page books. Therefore, even a 2% difference is equal to 20 500-page books of information. So this shows that there's a lot of differences, even if we stick with 98% similarity.
Excuse me,
The
sir.
2% differences are enormous because they are equivalent to 20 500-page books of information. In other words, if you have 20 books and each book is 500 pages long, that is the amount of difference that 2% makes between the chimp and human beings. Yes.
Yeah. You're changing the screen?
What do you see on the screen?
It's still showing Beginners Apologetics 2022 trimester 1.
Oh, it had always been showing that?
Yes, yes. I realized you were looking at your screen like you're changing the screen. That's why I asked.
Okay. Let me see what the problem is. Do you see any changing of the screen? Do you see?
I'm seeing Beginners Apologetics 2022, seeing general objectives now and specific objectives. And those similar,
What do you see now?
yeah, those similar body parts and similar DNA mean that.
Right. Okay. So make sure that in your revision, you look at these, you focus much of your time on these highlighted sections. So I've shown from the highlighted sections that the evolutionist claims that there are similarities of body parts between the chimpanzee and the human being. And also that they claim that there is 98% similarity of DNA between the chimp's DNA and the human being's DNA, leading to claims that humans and chimpanzees are cousins or relatives, having one common ancestor. And what I showed on this section is that the 98% similarity was based on a small fraction of the genetic code. But now that all of the genetic code for chimpanzees and humans have been looked at, the maximum similarity is not more than 87%. And it could be argued that it is below 70%. But even if we stick to 98% similarity, human beings have about the amount of information that would fill 1,000 books, and each book is 500 pages long. So mathematically, if you take 2% of this information, it is equal to 20 books, and each book has 500 pages. So that is still a significant difference in the genetic code between human beings and chimpanzees. Okay, so we're going to be moving on to lesson number 13 in our vision. As I said earlier, you will be getting these reviews for you to look at in your preparation. So moving on to lesson 13. Okay, do you see the screen changing?
General objectives,
And
specific objectives.
okay, good. Okay, so focus on the screen where you see the highlighted section. In other words, focus on this whole page. All right, so similarities between human and some animal embryos as printed by Ernest Haeckel in the late 1860s. Now notice how he drew the fish embryo in its early stage of development to look almost the same as the salamander embryo and the turtle embryo and the bird embryo and the mammal embryo and the human embryo. What he was trying to prove from this is that this shows that we must have had a common ancestor with the fish, and that all of these different creatures must have evolved from the fish, so that we're all related in that we evolved from the fish, since all of them look so similar to the embryo of the fish. So that is what he was trying to prove in drawing the embryos like that. However, when we look closely at what is said to be similarities, we see that there are some serious misunderstandings. First of all, we know that fish have gills, and gills are flaps in the side of the fish that open up and close continuously to let in water, and the water moves inside of the fish, and as it moves inside of the fish, oxygen is taken out of the water to provide the fish with oxygen. That's how it breathes underwater. And so going back to the drawing, these bumps here that you see in the embryo of the fish and in the embryo of the salamander and the embryo of the turtle and the embryo of the bird and the embryo of the mammal and the embryo of the human are said to be gill slits, that we all got them because we originated from the fish. But when we examine what is called gill slits in human beings, we're going to see that it is really not to be called gill slits, but they use this to try to prove that we came from the fish, breathing through gills under the water. I will have more to say on this shortly. Tails. Going back to the drawings, all of these embryos seem to have tails, including the human embryo. And so again, this man said that it shows that we originated from the fish, and that the fish evolved into amphibians, that is, animals that can live both in water and on dry land, like tadpoles, which have tiny tails, and in their adult development become frogs. And amphibians evolved into reptiles like lizards, which have tails, and reptiles evolved into birds, which have feathery tails, and birds evolved into mammals like the ancestor of the apes and humans, which have tails, and the ancestor of the apes and humans evolved into both apes, which have tails, and human beings who have a tailbone. So they use the gill slits and the tails to claim that we evolved from the fish. But what do the human and animal embryos really look like? You can see now, this is the drawing that Ernst Haeckel drew. And underneath each of these is what the embryo actually looks like. Down at the bottom under the fish, this is what the fish embryo looks like. This is what the salamander embryo looks like. Now notice how different from each other they look. This is what the turtle embryo looks like. Well, it is not much different from the drawing. This is what the chicken embryo looks like, and look how different it is. This is what the rabbit embryo looks like. It is similar to the drawing here. And this is what the human embryo looks like. But notice that they're not so similar as up in the first line, the first row, I should say. So Ernst Haeckel, in the first row of prints of a fish embryo, a salamander embryo, a turtle embryo, a chicken embryo, a rabbit embryo, and a human embryo, made them look almost the same. In the second row of prints of a fish embryo, a salamander embryo, a turtle embryo, a chicken embryo, a rabbit embryo, and a human embryo, look how they are different from each other. And so the argument that because they look so much alike in the embryo stage of development, it must mean that in the past, that all of us evolved from the fish. So that was Ernst Haeckel's argument. Now I need to clear up something about gill slits and tails. Gill slits are not proof that human beings descended from fish in water. They later develop into the thymus gland in the neck, which helps to fight germs. They later develop into the parathyroid glands in the neck, which helps to keep calcium at the right level in the body. They later develop into the middle ear to help in hearing sounds. They are never used to take oxygen from the amniotic fluid surrounding the embryo in the womb, but the umbilical cord brings air into the body of the embryo. Also, tails are not proof that human beings descended from the ancestor of the apes and humans. What looks like a tail is the end part of the developing backbone. The information in the genes of human embryos does not have any instructions for the formation of a tail as the information in the genes of the ape embryos have. It is this information in the genes which keeps one kind of life different from other kinds of life, and which prevents one kind of life from changing into a completely different kind of life. Okay, let me move on to another revision. We're moving on to lesson 14. Okay, we're looking at, does junk DNA prove evolution? Okay, evolutionists believe that there was not enough time for the whole sequence of genes to evolve. And so they theorize that most of the genes would be junk, that is, not having any function. In the 1970s, scientists discovered that only 3% of DNA codes for making proteins. This confirmed for them the theory that most of the DNA would not have any function since there was not enough time to evolve such a complex system of information storage, copying of information, and making different parts of the cell with proteins. But there was a project that was launched in 2003 and ended in 2012, in which scientists from all over the world studied the DNA. And there are three facts which they discovered about it. First of all, 93% of DNA is functional, and this would likely go to 100% with further research. Two, the portion of DNA that do not code for proteins have 4 million switches that control when our genes turn on or off and how much protein they make. So even though they don't code for proteins, they are important for regulating or controlling what our genes produce, what our genes make. These not only affect all the cells and organs in our body, but they do this at different points in our lifetime. And so we can conclude there is no junk DNA. The parts of the DNA that do not code for making proteins control when one gene is turned on or off and how much protein they make. The DNA did not evolve, but its complex design shows that an intelligent mind created it from the beginning, and it was not the result of random natural processes. This intelligent mind is God, the Creator, whose thoughts are very deep, Psalm 92, verse 5, and his understanding is infinite, that is, it cannot end, Psalm 147, verse 5. Okay, one more lesson. Moving on to lesson 15. Okay, lesson 15 is, do so-called useless organs prove that evolution has taken place? All right, can you see the screen?
Yes, sir.
All right. First of all, let us look at 4 questions about useless organs. If evolution were true, simple organs which may no longer function as they used to should have developed into complex organs or more advanced organs. How is it then that these useless organs did not develop advanced features and functions? 2, if evolution were true, how is it that new DNA information did not change the simple organs into new and complex organs? 3, if evolution were true, how is it that there was no new information added to the DNA, but instead there was a loss of information that caused the organ not to be able to be used in a way that it used to function? Number 4, just because scientists may not know of a function of a useless organ, does this mean that in the future they may not find that this useless organ, in fact, had a use all along? Okay, I'm going to change the screen. Okay, let us look at examples of so-called useless organs that have now been discovered to have use. First of all, wings on birds that cannot fly. Ostrich and penguin are 2 birds that have wings, but they don't use their wings to fly. This does not prove evolution, for there has been a loss of function, not an increase in function, which would have been expected if evolution were really happening. There has been no new information added to the DNA to increase the capability of the wings. However, it would be incorrect that the wings have absolutely no use. The wings may be used for balance while running, cooling in hot weather, protection of the rib cage in falls, mating rituals, scaring predators, and sheltering of young ones. If the wings are useless, why are the muscles functional, allowing these birds to move their wings? Another example of useless organs that have now been discovered to have use is the human appendix. The human appendix was once thought to be useless, but it is now known to help control bacteria entering the intestines, to keep a person healthy, to keep a person from getting sick. Number 3, the human tonsils was once thought to be useless, but it is now known to help to fight throat infections. Okay, I'm trying to get back to the screen. We're going to look at a biblical explanation for so-called useless organs. Why is it some organs don't function in the way that they used to function? Okay, so we're going to be looking at that. Why? Okay, can you see this one? What is the title of this page?
Title is a biblical explanation.
All right, good. When God made his creation, he saw that it was very good. Genesis chapter 1, verse 31. So that means that all the different organs or parts of the body were very good, that they could do what they were created to do. Number 2, when sin entered into the world, it not only affected human beings, but it affected all of nature. Before sin, humans and animals ate plants and fruits, but no meat. Genesis chapter 1, verses 29 and 30. After sin entered, animals started to eat one another. There was also a deterioration in the bodies of humans and animals, which led to diseases and death, according to Genesis chapter 3, verses 14 through 19, and Romans chapter 8, verses 18 through 22. In this context, mutations, which means accidental copying errors in the genes, resulted in the loss of information in the genes, leading to the loss of original function in the wings of some birds, but did not leave their wings entirely without function. This is not new information in the genes which brought this change, but a loss of information as a result of accidental copying errors in the genes. Also, epigenetics, which is that regulatory system that tells a gene when to turn on and when to turn off, turned off some genes and turned on other genes in the DNA in response to the environment, leading, for example, to some fish which have no eyes because they swim in deep, dark waters, and to prevent their eyes from getting damaged. or to some beetles losing their wings to help to prevent them from being blown away on a windy island. However, this is not evolution, since there has been no new information added to the genes of the DNA, but some information has been turned off and other information already there has been turned on. So there are different ways to account for changes in living things. It can be a loss of information that causes a lack of function in some parts of the body, a lack of the original function, or it can be that there has been a regulatory system that has turned off those genes that have the information for the making of eyes, because you don't need the eyes when you're in a deep, dark place and you can't see anything. And it will safeguard your eyes from getting damaged if no eyes are developed. Or beetles losing the information or the information being turned off for making wings, because if they have wings, it will be to their disadvantage in that it will cause them to be blown away. So that is what happens, but we don't have any change that results in advanced features and functions in living things. That kind of change does not happen, and that is the kind of change that evolution is. In the concept of evolution, it is an advancement in the features and functions of living things so that they become better. They can do more things than they did in the past. But a loss of function is going in a different direction from evolution. And we can explain it biblically because it is as a result of sin why these things have happened to living things. Okay, that was the last lesson. I'll be sending it to you later on today, God willing. Do you have any question on any of the lessons we have reviewed? Any question? Okay. All right, I'm stopping here and make sure that you look at each of these lessons, especially the parts that are highlighted, to focus much of your attention on those areas. Even though you might read the whole lesson, focus on those areas that are highlighted. Okay, I'll see you later.